Before we get started on the talk, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Sutra Study class. We started Sutra Study last year on the Amitabha Sutra, which is the second most important sutra in our tradition here at the temple. And so if you join us for Wednesday evening services, this is the sutra that we chant. It's a pretty short sutra compared to the majority of sutras in our Buddhist canon, but it is also a very important one and one of the oldest discourses in Mahayana Buddhism as well. So I've put out the chant books for you guys. So last year, for the 6-7 months that we had class, we literally just covered the very first paragraph. So it took a minute, right? But it took a minute because the first paragraph is essentially just the intro, right? It's the intro of who, what, when, and where. And then pretty much the list of the attendees, the audience pretty much of the 16 arhats and the bodhisattvas and everyone else that joined. And so we pretty much just covered the history of all those arhats, right? Those enlightened beings and the bodhisattvas. We went through their backgrounds, how they, we gave the story of those people, those important people. So today we'll pretty much continue on. So we'll continue on is kind of where all the good stuff finally comes in, all the meat of the sutra. Just kidding. More like, dang it. What's the not meat called? What's the vegetarian meat called? It's on the tip of my tongue. Impossible meat, sorry. So now we're going to get into the impossible meat of the sutra. But quickly, I just want to kind of go over some intro of the sutra, of any sutra. So in Buddhism, there are what we call the 12 divisions or 12 categories of sutras, essentially 12 different types of sutras that there are. And the Amitabha Sutra falls under one of the rare ones. It falls under the category of the sutras that were given without request. So the majority of the sutras and discourses that we have in Buddhism are all responses from the Buddha, from a question that he may have been asked from one of his disciples or the monks. And so Amitabha Sutra falls under the category of a sutra given without request. So nobody asked for it, but the Buddha thought it was time and it was an important sutra to give. And so he gave it to his disciples without a request from anybody. So all sutras, essentially, though, fall under are divided into kind of 3 parts: the preface, which is kind of like a foreword, what we call the principle proper, which is the prologue, and the transmission, which is kind of like the postscript. So the preface discusses the sutra's general meaning. The principle proper discusses its doctrines, and its transmission instructs us to transmit the sutra and to propagate it and make it flow. So I also want to kind of cover the 6 requisites of all sutras. So all sutras fall under or have to have these 6 requisites. And these 6 requisites are pretty much the sign of the knowing that a sutra is genuine. Because back in the Buddha's day, it was Brahmanism, where the Vedas were the main kind of teachings or the religion of the time. And all of their, also are called sutras, always begin with or the letters A or O, which indicate non-existence and existence, right? And so when the Buddha was dying, his main disciple, Ananda, had asked the Buddha 4 questions. Let's call it the 4 questions of Ananda. And one of the questions was how do we introduce a sutra or a teaching? And the Buddha gave him these requisites. And so these requisites are things that we will always see in a sutra, in any main sutra. And as long as the requisites are applied or there, we can determine that the sutra is authentic for the most part. But for the requisites, I'll put all the names because there's 16 names. Shariputra, Mahamodgalayana, Mahakashyapa, Mahakatyana, Mahakashuthira, Rivata, Shodipantaka, Nanda, Ananda, Rahula, Gavampati, Pendula, Bharadvaja, Karodayan, Mahakafina, Vakuda, Aniruddha. Aniruddha is the last one, right? Yeah, okay. Phew, it's a mouthful. So anyway, 6 requisites. The first one is faith. The second one is the hearer. The third is the host. 4 is Third is time. 4th is host. 5th is place, and the 6th is audience. Faith, hearer, time, host, place, and audience. So these are the 6 requisites for every sutra. And so we'll recognize faith as thus, because we're having faith in thus, and thus meaning coming from the perspective of Ananda. Ananda is Ananda was the Buddha's main disciple, and Ananda was said to have photographic memory. And so when the first Buddhist council had gathered to recite all the Buddhist teachings and to pretty much get them formalized and recorded, it was up to Ananda to recite them because he had memorized them. And so thus is pretty much the faith in Ananda knowing what he's talking about. So faith is thus, here I have heard, so from Ananda, and at one time would be time. The host, of course, is the Buddha. The place is the garden of benefactors and of orphans and the solitary. And then that's place, right? Host is the Buddha, place is benefactor, and great bhikshus were the audience. I guess the rest wasn't needed after all. But those are the 6 requisites of any sutra, any genuine Buddhist sutra. And so you'll see just in this sutra, and you'll see in the Lotus Sutra, our other mean sutra, all begin with these 6 requisites. All right, so then the second paragraph we'll go over a couple of these paragraphs, but the next section would be, at that time the Buddha told the elder Shariputra, passing from here through hundreds of millions of Buddha lands to the west, there was a world called ultimate bliss. In this land, a Buddha called Amitabha right now teaches the Dharma. So I didn't put it here, but also, so kind of highlighting at this time, this is really just referring who was there also, right? And so we know in the majority of these kind of bigger assemblies that the Buddha had, there were an accumulation of all his disciples, his monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, the bodhisattvas, sometimes, rulers, if the kings were there or the queens were there. So then the Buddha told Shariputra if he traveled to the west from there, through hundreds of thousands of millions of Buddha lands, there would be a world system called ultimate bliss, or the land of ultimate bliss, where there is 0 suffering and everything is blissful, supposedly. And in this land, there's a Buddha called Amitabha. Now, Amitabha is a Sanskrit name, but Amitabha means limitless light. He's also known as Amitayus, which means limitless life. And so essentially it's just representing that his light is measureless and it illuminates all the lands in the 10 directions, everywhere without obstruction. And that his lifespan extends for millions of great kalpas without end. Kalpa is a measurement it's a measurement. It just means an eon. And an eon or a kalpa in this case, from my own view take on the work, on the meaning of kalpa, which means eon. And to me, eon means the lifespan of the universe. So from the Big Bang to the, whatever you want to believe how it ends, the crunch or the great cold, whatever it is, whatever theory you want to take with you. So basically from the beginning of the universe to the end of it is 1 eon, 1 kalpa. And so the lifespan of Amitabha spans for millions of kalpas. So just a continuous birth and rebirth of the universe. Next, Shariputra, for what reason is this land called ultimate bliss? And so Shariputra, one of a very also big name that we'll see in a lot of sutras too, because Shariputra is one of the ones that typically asks a lot of questions. And so we'll see Shariputra in quite a few sutras out there. But he's known as the Bodhisattva of great wisdom, like Manjushri, right? And Shariputra had great wisdom. But even though he had great wisdom, he didn't know to ask the Buddha this question of Amitabha. And so Buddha had to ask it himself. And then the next sentence is, all living beings of this land endure none of the sufferings, but enjoy every bliss. Therefore, it is called ultimate bliss. So in Amitabha's Pure Land, in the Pure Land, living beings are born by transformation from lotus flowers. So their birth is considered pure and not one out of desire or emotions, right? Because their bodies are pure and aren't a result of sexual desire and the lustful thoughts that us normal people will have, right? Men and women. So this is why they endure none of the sufferings, but enjoy every bliss. We suffer because our bodies are created from this unclean, unpure substance of father's semen and the mother's blood. And so we're born in an impure way. Whereas in any pure land, for the most part, but especially Amitabha's Pure Land, we're born by transformation. So there's essentially coming out of nowhere or nothing, right? So there's no birthing per se, normal human birth that is created. And so there's no unclean, impure birth there. And so when the sutras are lectured, or when you hear the Dharma being spoken or taught, right, it's essentially just teaching you one thing, right? The entire practice, the entire goal of your practice is to attain one goal, essentially, to purify the mind, right? And by purifying the mind, then we can fall into the category of the clear, pure, ocean-wide assembly of bodhisattvas. Because if we are motivated by the mundane activities of sexual desire, then we're essentially following an impure path, right? Because think of you're just eating to your full. You're doing everything that you want to do to entertain yourself, to attain your desires and wants and needs. And then after that, you're like, well, there's nothing else to do, so let's just sex it out, right? And so the mind is just constantly going after things that it believes it needs and wants. And without being mindful, without being aware of what is actually happening in the mind, it pushes away off the path of purity and in the attempt of purifying the mind. So whenever we recite Namo Amitabha Buddha, right, we are essentially creating or helping create and adorn our own pure land in the minds. Because you can think of the belief of Pure Land is in two unfortunate extremes, right? So there are those that believe that Pure Land is an actual destination, right? Heaven or whatever that one goes to after they pass. Or the literal extreme of that, where it's right here and right now, right? Which is personally my belief, right? But either way, the focus pretty much on especially if we're especially if we're speaking on the Pure Land tradition, because there's a Pure Land tradition on its own, right? In its own, it's a Pure Land tradition where they use the three Amitabha Sutras, the larger Amitabha Sutra, the shorter Amitabha Sutra, which is one we chant, and the Contemplation Sutra of Amitabha. Those are the three main sutras. But the entire goal of the Pure Land tradition is to purify the mind, to ready the mind in its totality, so that when one dies, their mind's pure enough to go to the Pure Land. Because in the sutra, it tells us that it doesn't matter how many times you recite the Buddha's name. It doesn't matter how many times you chant or you pray or you do good, right? It's not for everybody. It's not that easy to get in, right? Because we'll see, even in the sutra where it says if you just recite Amitabha's name at least 10 times, right, you can be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land of ultimate bliss. But in the very next sentence, it tells you, but it's not actually that easy. Right? Just saying Namo Amitabha Buddha 10 times isn't going to guarantee you any purity or any guarantee of rebirth in the Pure Land. It is completely dependent on the way and how aggressive is pretty much of how you purify the mind, right? And so we use the recitation of Namo Amitabha Buddha as an object of meditation, essentially, right? Just like any other object of meditation we use in meditation, right? If you're using your breath or using a visualization or a mantra, that object of meditation is doing or should be doing only one thing, right? Focusing the mind on that one object for the entirety of the time that you're reciting or you're visualizing or you're whatever you're doing, right? And by focusing and meditating on that one thing, right, it's pretty much creates a fence, a perimeter around your mind where that doesn't allow external factors to come in, doesn't allow distractions to arise. It doesn't allow negative thoughts or emotions or feelings arise, or unwholesome thoughts or feelings arise, right? So it's pretty much kind of like a shield. It's a guardian, is what it's doing. And so in the Pure Line tradition, the practitioners would recite Namo Amitabha Buddha thousands of times a day. Literally, all they do all day in their mind, whether it's mentally or out loud, they'll just be chanting Namo Amitabha Buddha, Namo Amitabha Buddha, Namo Amitabha Buddha, right? And so for us, for me, right, because there's not, for me, I don't typically say Namo Amitabha Buddha, but I will say Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. There's not a single day that goes by that I don't say Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. But when it's said, again, just like kind of going back to, I think I mentioned before, like monks and nuns, or especially novice monks and nuns, have 52 gathas, little mantras that they have to memorize as novices. And they use these mantras, they're just little short poems, right? But it's recited for pretty much any mundane activity we do. So when you wake up in the morning, you say a mantra. When you get out of bed, you say this little mantra. Putting on the robe, you say a mantra. Brushing your teeth, a mantra. Washing, cleaning, walking, sitting. Preparing your seat, preparing your chant book. Everything that's being done, there's a mantra associated with it, right? Because this mantra is essentially saying Namo Amitabha Buddha or Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, right? It's kind of replacing that one pointed object, that object of meditation. And because if you're being mindful and you have something to focus the mind on, then the mind doesn't have too much room to scatter into different disturbances, right? It doesn't have time or room for distractions to arise or whatever, right? And so whether you use Namo Amitabha Buddha or Namo Shakyamuni Buddha or literally anything else, you can literally, any mantra, car, cat, dog, hat, right? Anything can be a mantra. But that mantra is doing, regardless of what the word is, the word itself has zero power, right? The power is in the concentration, the focus you hold on to with whatever word you're using, right? And it's that concentration that's really honing your power of concentration, of your focus. Because then if you're not allowing external things to arise and to distract you, whether it's desire or ill will or anger or frustration, whatever it may be, you're purifying the mind, right? You're not allowing the negativity, the unwholesomeness to take root. And so that's why we recite. The next sentence, paragraph, moreover, Shariputra, this land of ultimate bliss is everywhere surrounded by 7 tiers of railings, 7 layers of netting, and 7 rows of trees, all formed from the 4 treasures, and for this reason named ultimate bliss. The one thing we also have to remember is in Buddhism, numbers is everything. There's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of lists. But we use these lists, these numbers, to represent specific teachings, right? So the Buddha listed a lot of things to help us remember what they are, right? And so when we say, if you say, did you take your precepts, for instance, right? You can sit there all you want and be like, how many precepts are there? Am I counting all of them? But if you say it's the 5 precepts, then you can be like, all right, there's 5. I can remember what the 5 are, right? Or the 5 hindrances, or the Eightfold Path, or the 4 Noble Truths. Like everything has a number associated. And the Buddha did that on purpose to help us remember just exactly how many things there are, So that way when we're recounting them, or when we're reciting them, or when we're teaching them, it's much easier for people to remember. And so in this sutra, there's a lot of numbers, as we'll see as we continue on. But everything means something, right? Everything is very much symbolic to something else. And in this sutra, especially the shorter Amitabha Sutra, well, actually all three of the Amitabha Sutras describe Amitabha's Pure Land. And so there's a lot of descriptive details of the Pure Land in this shorter sutra. But anyway, so we'll kind of go through the list of what these things are. So the railings here, doesn't specifically say in the sutra, but it does in the longer sutra. But these railings are they run horizontal. Like I mentioned earlier, they kind of run, they're fences to guard the mind. And they're arranged vertically in 7 tiers. So railings here represents the precepts. The netting represents concentration, and the trees represent wisdom. So if we kind of take precepts and kind of put a slash to that, it'd be kind of AKA morality. So it's essentially morality, concentration, and wisdom, which is the 3 categories that we use to represent the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path can be subcategorized into the 3 categories of morality, wisdom, and concentration. And the number 7 here is used to classify the 7 classes, or pretty much the classification of the 37 factors of enlightenment. And the 37 factors of enlightenment are, again, categorized into 7 groups. And they are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So that's pretty much what we covered in our meditation class last year. Then we have the 4 right efforts. We have the 4 bases of mental power, the 5 roots, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 spiritual powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the Eightfold Path. So 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 7, and 8 is 37 factors of enlightenment. Eventually, I'll go through them specifically, but we're not going to go there today. But just remember that 7 here is representing the 7 factors of enlightenment. So the tiers again, the railings again represent the precepts, right? And so we know that the precepts, when we take precepts or the vows to our practice, it's essentially prohibiting kind of preventing harm to be done, right? To prevent any error, right? We just had the precept ceremony for Stephanie last weekend. And again, I said, these precepts aren't something that you follow like commandments or anything, but they're really just promises to yourself, promises that you won't do these bad things, because if you avoid doing these bad things, then you're guaranteed to have a better, happier, more peaceful life. So the precepts are to abstain from killing, or to protect life, to abstain from stealing, abstain from sexual misconduct, abstain from lying, and abstain from intoxicants, right? These aren't religious ideologies. These are just common sense, right? Common sense not to kill. It's common sense not to lie. It's common sense not to commit sexual misconduct, meaning to be faithful to your partner, to not be with someone that's in a relationship, or not to, if you're in a relationship, not to be with anyone, etc., and not to lie, steal, and take intoxicants, meaning drugs and alcohol, or at least excessive, right? There's a point of moderation in Buddhism. So even if we do drink in moderation. 1 glass of wine is okay. A beer or 2, right? We know scientifically there's some benefit to a good wine or a good beer, but that doesn't mean you have to go and get drunk and become stupid, right? At that point, it becomes harmful, not helpful. And so we know by abstaining from doing these things, then we are essentially protecting ourselves and protecting others. That's the entire goal of humanity, I would hope, right, is to protect one another. And by abstaining from these, or by following these precepts, then we can essentially guarantee that protection. And then the 7 layers of netting represent concentration. And this is not the same kind of concentration we get from meditation. In meditation, the concentration that is achieved is called samadhi, or if we go further into samadhi, we get to the jhanas. But this concentration that's representing in here is a state of being that's unmoved by situations. So for example, if a man or a woman sees a good-looking man or woman and has no thought of sexual desire, then it's said that they possess true concentration power, right? So it said, seeing as if not seeing and hearing as if not hearing. And then the quote is, the eyes see forms outside, but inside there is nothingness. The ears hear external sounds, but the mind does not know. So it's essentially a non-reaction type of thing. So instead of seeing a man or woman, beautiful, ugly, tall, short, young or old, you're simply just seeing human being, right? There's no judgment. There's no application of like or dislike or pleasurable or unpleasurable, right? There's no duality there, right? You're just seeing a person for a person, right? Because the moment we add any extra fluff to it, we've already stepped outside our concentration. We've stepped outside of attempting to purify the mind, right? The moment you add any extra commentary is when that purification gets clogged. Your filter gets clogged up. And then the 7 rows of trees. And trees here represent wisdom. And so if we have wisdom, then we are considered tall, right? Not physically, we don't have to physically be tall in this case, right? It's not a question of your physical tallness or shortness. But with wisdom, you're seen like 7 rows of trees, of tall trees. And without wisdom, that we are like 7 rows of grass. That's what the commentary says, which I've always loved this representation. If we have wisdom, you're like 7 tall trees. If you have no wisdom, you're like 7 short little grass things. What is it called? Blades of grass. The next part is all formed from the 4 treasures, and for this reason called ultimate bliss. And so the 4 treasures, we're going to see here 4 treasures and 7 treasures. And 7 is just an extension of the 4, but the 4 treasures in Buddhism is gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and crystal. And the 4 treasures represents the 4 virtues of nirvana, which is permanence, bliss, true self, and purity. And so I'll kind of quickly go over these 4 virtues. So the first virtue is permanence. So Amitabha, since it said Amitabha's lifespan is limitless, not only does Amitabha Buddha have a limitless lifespan, but when we are born in the line of ultimate bliss, we also will have a limitless lifespan, essentially meaning that we are permanent. The second virtue is bliss. And again, this pretty much just goes back to being born. Those that are born in the Pure Land endure none of the sufferings, but enjoy every bliss. True self in the land of ultimate bliss has 8 great freedoms, 8 functions, 8 kinds of strengths, and 8 spiritual penetrations. These are all called the 8 great freedoms of self. And I won't go through them because these are things I don't necessarily subscribe to. They're very supernaturally, and I avoid that. The 4th virtue is purity. And again, since this land is pure, it's adorned with the 4 treasures, which represent the 4 virtues of nirvana. And it's an unobstructed interpretation, thus named ultimate bliss. Okay, so we'll go to the next paragraph. Yeah, I have time to cover that. Okay, so the next paragraph is, moreover, Shariputra, this land of ultimate bliss has pools of the 7 jewels filled with the waters of 8 meritorious virtues. The bottom of each pool is pure, spread over with golden sand. On the 4 sides are stairs of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and crystal. Above are raised pavilions adorned with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and crystal, mother of pearl, red pearls, and carnelian. So in the previous paragraph, it described the kind of the exquisite beauty of the land of ultimate bliss. And in this passage, it praises the subtle wonder of its water pools. And so the Buddha here told Shariputra that this land of ultimate bliss has pools of the 7 jewels. And so there are pools in the Saha world. The Saha world is our world. We call our world Saha. But our pools are made of mud, or cement, or, man-made things, essentially. But none of the treasures, right? And they're not made of gold or silver, lapis lazuli, or anything like that. But the pools in Amitabha's land are all made of these jewels, of the 7 jewels. I wish I had a pool made of lapis lazuli. It's my favorite gem. Can you imagine a giant pool just made of lapis? Oof. Or crystal? Oof. Would there even be a crystal that big? Crystal, ironically, is also called water jade. Yeah. So anyway, so the pools have waters of 8 meritorious virtues, and these 8 virtues of the water. The first virtue is that it's tepid, so it's warm and it's cool at the same time, right? And the quality of the water is considered inconceivable. The second virtue is that it's pure. So no matter how many times you wash with the water, it doesn't get dirty, it doesn't gather dust or dirt or mud or anything from bathing in it, right? You can soak yourself in mud and hop into this pool to clean yourself off, and it would still be clean water. The third virtue is that the water is sweet. The fourth is that it's soft, which just comes to mind of like hard water, like of hard water and water softener. So every time I see this, I just imagine these pools have like these giant water softeners. The fifth virtue is that it's moistening. The sixth is that it's harmonizing. And the description here is that if you wash with this water, your heart and mind will be at peace without the slightest trace of bad temper. The seventh, that it banishes hunger and thirst. And 8 is that it nourishes all roots. And the description to this one is kind of interesting. So the description of this 8th virtue, that it nourishes all roots, is that it gives sustenance to all your sense organs. Your eyes become bright and light, and your ears, if once deaf, now can hear. If your nose is stuffed up, that it'll clear it. And so whatever you eat will taste good. Your hands and feet work without feeling tired. And the water also nourishes your good roots and gets rid of your bad karma. The next section is that on the 4 sides are stairs of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and crystal. This is not much to it. It's really just a description, again, of these stairs. And then next part is above are raised pavilions adorned with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, crystal, mother of pearl, red pearls, and carnelian. Again, it's just very descriptive. And in the pools are lotuses as large as carriage wheels. So in the Amitabha, in the land of ultimate bliss, each pool is described as being as big as 100 great seas, and that the lotuses in these pools are as large as carriage wheels. And the carriage wheels on the chariot of the wheel-turning sage king are of 1 yojana in diameter. So these lotuses in the pool in these pools are as large as wide as 1 yojana. And yojana is also a measurement in Buddhism. So a small yojana, I don't know where these numbers come from exactly, but I'm going to tell you. A small yojana is 40 miles, a middle-sized one is 60 miles, and a large one is 80 miles. So this one lotus in this pool, in this pond, in the Pure Land, is 80 miles in diameter, which I can't even fathom, an 80-mile large lotus. Can you imagine? So lotuses growing in a pool as large as 100 great seas would have to be pretty big, right? And the flowers in these pools are green colored of green light, yellow colored of yellow light, red colored of red light, white colored of white light, and subtly, wonderfully fragrant and pure. So we know that the water is subtle and soft and it looks like water, but it's said that when you reach out to kind of touch this water, that it feels like there's nothing there. That's how subtle and pure it is. Pure it is, that it doesn't even feel like water when you try to touch it. But as soon as you smell its fragrance, you'll bring forth the Bodhi mind. The lotuses of the 4 colors in the land of ultimate bliss shine with these colors, right? Of green, yellow, red, and white. And they represent, again, they mean everything, right? There's meaning to everything. They represent the 4 applications of mindfulness, which is the 4 foundations of mindfulness that we discussed already. The 4 right efforts and the 4 bases of supernatural power. Deciding if I want to go through one. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop there. So that was a handful. We're one paragraph away from descriptions describing the Amitabha lands. Which is why I feel like I should probably go ahead and just finish that. No, I'll stop. I'll wait. Okay. We're about 2 paragraphs away from finishing kind of the description part of the sutra. Because the next part there's descriptions of other teachings, teachings within teachings, and so that'll take some time, so I'll save that for the next class. So from second paragraph on page 168 all the way through the last paragraph from 169. Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts?
Where are the meritorious virtues? Where are those found?
from what sutra it comes from? I have no idea. That's a great question. I can describe them, but I don't know where they come from. 8 meritorious virtues. If I can remember what they're called in, do I have another name in Sanskrit? If I have that name in Sanskrit, then it may spark something. Isn't it weird when you like know something in a different language, it reminds you more than your main language? If you speak more than one language. I speak 4, so sometimes I have to switch my mind thinking between different languages to remember what different things are. I don't have the Sanskrit name on here, but I will find that out for you. Because I think that brings up a good point, actually, because all the lists I've said so far, right, they all come from some other teaching, right? And so because they come from some other teaching, it will, unless the sutra itself is describing what that list is, right, then it comes from that sutra. But if it just says the 8, like the 8 great realizations or anything else, that means there's a prior sutra mentioning them. So there's something older than that sutra that describes the details of it. Which then kind of, if you're scholarly, right, or if you think in that type of way, then it should kind of indicate, if you're looking at kind of a timeline, go to a time that's older than wherever the Amitabha Sutra comes from, right? The Amitabha Sutra, I think its first Amitabha Sutra came about a few hundred years after the Buddha had passed, right? So I don't think I have the time frame of the Amitabha Sutra in here. But if I remember correctly, it was first recorded around 200-ish BC. No, I don't have the time frame. No, I don't have the time frame. So if we know that, I'm just going to give 200 BC, right? If we know that Amitabha Sutra is 200 BC and it's mentioning all these different categories of other teachings, then we need to find teachings that are older than 200 BC to find the original sutra or the original discourse that these lists come from, right? So that is a great question. Yeah, I have homework. Any other questions? So a few more minutes. The Amitabha Sutra, as I said before, is considered, it was preached, without request. And in our tradition, Tiantai, when the patriarch Qi had kind of systemized the tradition, he also said that there's 3 periods that the Dharma is in, right? There's is it 2 or 3? No, I'm forgetting my own stuff. It doesn't matter. But the time, no, 3 periods of time, sorry. So there's the first period is while the Buddha was alive, right? That's the strongest when Buddhism was, or that's the time that Buddhism was at its peak, right? At its strongest, because the Buddha was alive. You had physical evidence that the Buddha was here. There's enlightenment, there's the teachings. Then the second period is considered 500 years after the Buddha had passed. I forgot what age it's called, but we're in the age now we're in the third age, which is called the Dharma ending age. So basically, the Dharma's going down, right? The Dharma's ending. Not anytime soon, hopefully, but we're in that age where it is kind of ending. It's dying essentially. But this pretty much just equates to the lifespan of the world, right? Because we already know the Earth itself is only going to be around for another 5 billion years or so, right, before it disappears. That's 5 billion years too long, to be quite honest. But anyway, but in 5 billion years, when I think that's when the sun engulfs the Earth by that time, because the sun would expand, become a red giant, and eat us all. Sorry, I'm very into the space stuff, so I know when exactly the Earth will go away. But anyway, so we already know that we already know the world, the Earth, the solar system, the universe, the galaxy itself is impermanent, right? It's going to end one day anyway. And so it's said that during the ending age of the Dharma, that there are certain sutras that will kind of disappear first, and kind of subsequently other sutras will fall. And the first one that goes, because the Maras, right? The Maras, again, there's 2 extremes to its meaning. The first extreme is, kind of like a devil figure, right? A demon, pretty much. That kind of hinders our practice. On the other side of that, Mara is just the hindrances of the mind, right? The mind itself is Mara. But anyway, so it said that Mara is most afraid of the Shurangama Sutra. And so that sutra would go first, essentially. That one's going to disappear first. And the last to disappear is going to be the Amitabha Sutra, which is said to disappear a few hundred years after the Shurangama Sutra. And so the Amitabha Sutra is going to last for a while, but it will be the very last sutra to go. And this is my own theory of Amitabha, of this reasoning. So again, Amitabha Sutra was given toward the end of the Buddha's life, right? And so as he got older and as he started to teach more, the Buddha started to teach more in-depth, more advanced teachings, right? And so we have the sutras like the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Flower Adornment Sutra, which was given for the Bodhisattvas, right? It's a huge sutra. I haven't even finished reading it because it's so ginormous. But it's a huge sutra. The Shurangama Sutra, which is also a huge sutra, has what we call the Shurangama mantras. There's 5 mantras in there. They are the longest mantras in Buddhism. And these are the mantras that monks and nuns recite in the morning, because the story behind the Shurangama mantras or the sutra was given to Ananda, because there was a time where the Buddha and his disciples were invited to the palace by some king for their meal, their daily meal. And Ananda stayed behind for whatever reason. And so he went alms by himself. And typically that's And there was a rule created because of this. Now the rule is a monk or a nun cannot go on alms by themselves. So, but prior to that precept that was given to the monks and nuns, Ananda did go on alms by himself. And as he was on alms, there was a beautiful woman that was trying to seduce Ananda. Ananda is said to have been very handsome, very good looking, and very well spoken, very charming, and so everybody wanted Ananda. But this woman said that her mother was some kind of witch or something, and she had given her daughter some kind of spell or potion to give Ananda, so that Ananda would fall in love with her and get married and whatnot. But prior to that, while Ananda was on alms, this woman had invited Ananda inside for this meal. And though Ananda was hesitant, he was ultimately convinced. And it is said that it's said that while he was inside waiting, it's when that woman and the mother did their little spellcraft and ultimately almost got Ananda to break his precepts, meaning that they almost had sex. But the Buddha, having the Buddha mind, knew that Ananda was in trouble. So he sent one of his disciples, I think it was Shariputra or Manjushri, I forgot who, but he sent someone to Ananda to give him the Shurangama mantra, to remind him of his practice, to remind him of his precepts, and to go back to being mindful, because he was being unmindful. And so this disciple showed up and gave Ananda the mantras, the Shurangama mantras, and kind of snapped him back into reality. And ever since then, the Buddha said, all right, no one's going out on their own because this crap would happen. So the precept, now there's an actual precept for monks and nuns that when a monk or nun goes out on alms round, that they must be accompanied by another monk or nun. And if they have to go on their own to practice Buddhanasati, which is mindfulness of the Buddha, so always recollecting the Buddha, always recollecting your practice as you walk on your alms round, so you don't forget yourself and be spellbound by some crazy old witch trying to get you to marry her daughter. So anyway, that's why the Shurangama mantra is, or the sutra is so important, because it quite literally reminds the monastics, monks and nuns, of their practice of staying pure. And so the maras, of course, who are impure, are trying to depurify you. I don't know if that's a word. So they're scared of that the most. And so the Shurangama Sutra and the Dharma Ending Age will go first, and the Amitabha will be last. I don't even think I give my explanation as to why, because I went off topic. But from my perspective, why I believe it's also the last is because it's kind of also the easiest. The Pure Land tradition, though there is a monastic sect to it, right? It actually is mostly focused for the lay practitioners, right? And so it's emphasized for lay practitioners. When it was emphasized in India at the time, and then when it moved to China and Japan and Korea and all of the South Asian countries, it became very popular because it allowed the mundane people, the lay people that worked all day and that couldn't become monastics, to give them that object of meditation, to give them something to focus and concentrate on all day, so they can work on purifying the mind, since they were not able to become monastics and purify their mind through their monastic practice. So while they're out in the fields or in the factories or whatever, again, the whole motto of Pure Land Buddhism, or the tradition, is to simply just recite Namo Amitabha Buddha. And so all these practitioners, these lay practitioners, all day while they're working the fields or working the factories, all I have to do is recite Namo Amitabha Buddha, Namo Amitabha Buddha, Namo Amitabha Buddha, Namo Amitabha Buddha. So it's very much geared toward the lay practitioners, right? And so to me, it's kind of like the easy way out, because if you go on the extreme side of that Pure Land is a destination, right? If you were to go to the Pure Land, you're guaranteed enlightenment, right? It's a guarantee. You're good enough to be accepted into the Pure Land, you're going to get enlightened, right? It's a guarantee. But it's a very long journey to become enlightened in the Pure Land. So it's kind of it's like, all right, as long as I'm in, right? I don't care how long it takes. I'm in, right? But for those that don't want that, our journey to enlightenment is much more tiresome, right? There's more work, right? There's more practice, there's more diligence involved, there's more study involved. And so I'm not bad-mouthing the tradition or anything, but it is the easy way out, in my very impure opinion, humble opinion. Not to invalidate it, right, in any way, shape, or form, but it is very much dependent on your practice and your goals and your time, really, right? Because if you have the time and have the effort and the energy to truly practice the progressive way, right? Not like not progressive like being progressive, but progressive like in progression, right? Your practice comes in sections, right? You have small enlightenments, few small alignments, and alignments get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until they become permanent, right? Progression, that kind of way. Which to me is more motivating, to be quite honest, right? Because if you have just a small aha moment, just a little small awakening during meditation or during a mundane activity, that simple little spark, I hope, for most, is enough to say, holy crap, something happened. I want it again. I want more of it. I want it to last longer. I want it to be bigger. I want fireworks, right? No fireworks are ever going to happen, but in your mind, you want fireworks. In your mind, the fireworks do happen when an aha moment happens. And so just by that little mini spark, right, hopefully, I would hope that in and of itself is enough encouragement, enough motivation, enough faith in the practice and in yourself to want more of it, right? Because I can say that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't just become a monk for no stupid reason, right? I can think of a bazillion better things to do with my life. To live in poverty and to live with nothing and to live with few items of clothing, right? I'd rather not nick my head, because I nicked my head this morning when I shaved and now it's tender. I'd rather not have these problems. But because of that one spark that came to me, right? That genuine realization of something. And I think I've told you the story before, but on impermanence, right? Impermanence is my favorite thing ever, 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 ever. I love impermanence. I love it. It's just saying the word impermanence is just, it's so beautiful. Like I want to marry the word impermanence. It's such a beautiful word. But anyway, that was my aha moment there. And I just knew there's no way I can go back. There's no way I could live in this world and be a part of the world and not get more of that, right? So of course I took the extreme measure and left the world and became a monk. That's not something that everybody does, but even for all of you that are here, I'm assuming you had some sort of aha moment, whether you've realized it or not, right? Or recognized it as a realization or as a moment of clarity. This is why you're here, right? You know that there's something more, and you're just trying to find it again, right? And once you do, again, you're just gonna want more of it. It's like eating your favorite food, right? If you have a whole plate of whatever your favorite food is, you can't just have one bite and be like, all right, I'm done. There's no freaking way, right? Absolutely not. You can never put a cheesecake in front of me and expect me to take one bite and leave it be. There's no way, right? That's my weakness right there. It's a good cheesecake. But there's no way you can have just one bite. So likewise, the enlightenment's the same way, the same thing. Once you had it, once you have that one little spark, right, you want more and more and more. But it takes time, it takes effort, it takes diligence, it takes practice, right? You have to really essentially reprogram your mind in a way, convincing it that the mundane life and the things that you may or may not do are beneficial to you, right? So one of the other positive benefits of the precepts is to remember, running out of time, is to remember how to live a good life, right? I've said it in the ceremony, right? You have to assess what you do in life, right? We know, I hope, that going to or ingesting toxic things and environment and places into your life isn't beneficial, right? Ingesting toxic places like bars or clubs or parties or anything that's not beneficial to you or to others, right, are toxic. Some movies are toxic. A lot of movies are toxic, right? Music can be toxic. Magazines, right? Pornography, obviously. All these other things that are unhelpful to you. The precepts gives you a moment of clarity as to why they're not helpful, right? Because what are you going to get out of it? 5, 10, 60 minutes of pleasure? It's dumb. Why would you want 60 minutes of impermanent pleasure when you can have 60 billion years of permanent pleasure of enlightenment, right? So that's why I love impermanence, because that way, when I do see this beautiful cheesecake in front of me, I know that when I take the bite and I'm enjoying the bite, that pleasant sensation or the feeling, the taste, and the quality of it that I'm enjoying won't last. And what do? We take another bite, right? We're constantly going back to it more and more and more because we're trying to satisfy or satiate this feeling of happiness that this cheesecake is giving us, knowing that if we just eat enough, eventually we won't want it anymore, right? That's our entire thinking for anything that we want in life. If I get enough of it, maybe one day I'll be sick of it. And sometimes that is the case, but usually it's not, right? That's why we constantly go after, that's why people get addicted to drugs and alcohol. Because you're thinking that, oh, I have to be in this constant state of drunkenness or highness, or I have to constantly be surrounded by people, I have to constantly be doing something, I have to constantly be going to concerts, I have to constantly be trying new food, I have to constantly be traveling, I have to constantly be with, others or by myself or whatever it may be, right? You're constantly going after things over and over again, trying to just fill that gap of need and want and desire, right? Thinking if you just constantly have it all the time, that's going to be good enough. But you're wasting. But imagine all that energy you're wasting just trying to constantly reestablish that connection of desire, of wants, and needs. That's exhausting, isn't it? Isn't it exhausting just constantly having to go after something over and over and over again, knowing that it's never going to quench that thirst? Isn't it exhausting? It is exhausting, but we don't think of it as exhausting. We just think of it as a desire or a need that we need to fulfill. As long as you fulfilled it, then you have it until it's gone, and then you need it again. Stupidity. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking. Any last minute questions? All right. Well, that's that for this class. Hopefully we've learned something about our great Sutra of Amitabha. It is a pretty short sutra, so you can find the text online anywhere. If you're reading it, it's about less than a 10-minute read. About a 10-minute read. It takes us, 15, 20 minutes to chant at my speed. But it's a short read, so I encourage everyone to read it fully. That way we have kind of an idea of what the sutra is next time you're here. And hopefully by next class, I'll finish the next few paragraphs where it's more descriptions. And then after that, we get kind of to the nitty-gritty good stuff. And then we'll go from there.
Is that Sutra studies every Friday?
Sutra studies every first and third Friday. And the meditation classes every second and fourth Saturday. Yeah, I did that to give myself time to not be busy. But yeah, every first and third Friday. First thing I was going to say. What are we in April? Probably done, I think, maybe, by end of July. I'm hoping by the end of July. I want to finish before Ulaanbaatar this year. And Ulaanbaatar, the celebration is usually around August, end of August. So I want to try to finish before then. So we'll see.
Is this the only sutra that you study here?
No. This is the sutra that's easiest for me to start with. Our main sutra is the Lotus Sutra, which the abbot and I went through fully a couple of years ago during the Sunday services. We're doing it during the Sunday services. And it took us about a year or so to finish the Lotus Sutra. I will go back to the Lotus Sutra probably after the Amitabha Sutra, but that'll probably be next year. Because once Sutra class is done this year, I'm gonna stop it for the rest of the year, and then we'll start again next year after the Lunar New Year. Yeah, Lotus Sutra is next. That's our main sutra here. That one's much, much longer. That for sure will take a couple of years to finish. Yeah, cool. All right. Please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times, and we'll go ahead and end the class. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha Namo Shakyamuni Buddha Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.